Have you ever felt the pang of loneliness? I've been there. Probably never more so than when we moved the week before the global pandemic hit. And the sting of loneliness is a new place that was pronounced in our lives for the next couple of years afterwards. Do you find yourself longing for deeper connections, for meaningful friendship? We're designed to be in community with one another, yet so many of us suffer with loneliness and isolation. Feelings of disconnect are now common, more than you may have ever realized before, and it can have devastating consequences. My colleague, Dr. Gregory Jantz, and I want to help you with that. That's why today we're going to be talking about how building meaningful connections can combat the effects of loneliness. Welcome back to your Hope Filled Perspective, where it's always our goal to restore hope, renew minds, and empower listeners to live in their God given identity. Today is an important conversation because I'm meeting and talking with more and more people who summarize their life as "I just feel lonely." That's why today we're talking about how building meaningful connections can combat the effects of loneliness. And to start off our episode, I just want to remind you of the verse that comes from Genesis 2, verse 18, and it says, "It is not good for man to be alone." My guest today is Dr. Gregory Jantz, who's a psychologist, a licensed mental health counselor, host of a national radio program, and the author of many books, including The Power of Connection: Maximize Your Health and Happiness with Close Relationships. We will put all the information about Dr. Jantz, his books, his ministry in the show notes that you can find at drmichelleb.com. He is a recognized leading authority with respect to family relationships, and he brings a message of hope and healing to audiences through conferences, seminars, podcast interviews, and he's the founder of the center. I love this, A Place of Hope. Welcome to the program, Dr. Jantz.
It is, and hope is there. And good to be with you, Dr. Michelle.
I'm so grateful that we are so like-minded, both in our profession and
Yeah.
in our faith. And I think you would agree with me. My tagline is hope prevails.
Yep. And hope comes when there's a plan. And so today we want to be a part of a plan. A plan means that I will have a hope for my future.
Yes, absolutely. Now, Dr. Jantz, I know that you say that humans are social creatures in need of connection with others. But why? Let's delve into why is that connection so vital to us?
Well, one of the things that has happened, and you framed it so nicely, is that even pre-pandemic, about 61% plus of Americans said, "I'm lonely." And the follow-up question to that national survey was a question that asked, can you name one close friend? Most people could not name one close friend. And so when we think about, well, we're designed for relationships, but I can't even think of one close friend. A close friend is somebody that trusts you, you feel love and acceptance. There's somebody that's going to tell you the truth, and you can count on them. There's a aspect of faithfulness in a enduring relationship. But we really have gotten to a place, and maybe social media is a part of the problem, but where we're not developing the relationships that probably we really were designed for.
That numbering pre-pandemic is
Yes.
staggering. I've not heard of a more updated number, but I can only imagine that the effects of pandemics has increased that statistic, and more people are dealing with loneliness. But why?
Yes.
Why is it that loneliness is such a pandemic, if you will? We've got
And it's,
people all over the place. So why is it we feel
yeah.
lonely?
And on some level, social media, we would say we're more connected than ever before. You go, well, I'm more connected, but am I? And we've kind of redefined what the word relationship means. For some, it means I have a whole lot of likes on my social media, or I have friends on Facebook, and we've skipped the normal developmental stages of having a relationship. You know, a relationship takes some time, you build a relationship, you spend time together. But if you think about how it is on social media, everything is instant. I have an instant friend, I get a thumbs up.
Right.
Everything's instant. I don't go through those relationship stages. In fact, if you ask a young person or Generation Z, if you say, tell me about your friends. Oh, I have lots of friends. Well, have you ever seen any of these friends? Oh, no, but we're friends. So we've changed the definition of what
Right.
it means to have a friend and be a friend. So this really has put us into a place of more isolation. So we're more isolated now than ever before. So if isolation goes up, and we're lying to ourselves and saying we're more connected because of social
Right.
media, isolation goes up, so does loneliness. And here's the next thing that goes up: depression.
Yeah.
So our depression rates and social anxiety rates are higher than we've ever seen them before.
Not only are they higher than we've ever seen them before, but we are seeing that it's impacting every single age group
Yes,
than ever before. Even our littles are displaying signs and symptoms of depression that we might not have recognized before, and certainly among our seniors. So it goes across every age span, wouldn't you agree?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, and you are right on when you say that. We're finding, and actually, right now, the number one diagnosis in our country happens to be anxiety
Yeah.
or anxiety disorder. So that's the number one diagnosis. Number two is depression. So these are, if you will, a non-medical diagnosis, but these are the number one diagnoses. So we know that loneliness, isolation, depression, anxiety, uh, post-pandemic, these numbers are staggering, and we have far too many folks who really kind of living in a state of despair.
Yeah.
There's some despondency. I would say there's a lot of apathy. Psychologists have come up kind of with a new term right now to describe some of this. It's called foreshortened future. I'll say that again: foreshortened future. What are they saying? Well, they're saying that people don't have a lot of hope for their future, foreshortened future. I don't see a lot of optimism or hope for my future. So we see this high degree of apathy and depression and despair.
And without that hope for the future, what do they have to live for? What do they have as short term goals that they're working towards? What do they have to look forward to? That's why your ministry and mine are so pivotal at helping people realize maybe we're putting our hope in the wrong things in the wrong places.
Right. Absolutely.
Now, today,
and we and we pretend to have because it's kind of the culture we're in, but we pretend to have these relationships, and we've kind of over digitized our brains and social media, and that's where we spend the bulk of our time. During the pandemic, work from home and then homeschooling really did not work. And we had the highest academic failure rates on record.
right.
But what it did was it threw people in, I call it into herds. Herds and herds of people went into social media, and that's where they live or spend so much of their time even now. So I just want to say that will promote, it sounds odd, but it will promote a more disconnection, even though you feel like you're more connected. It'll promote more loneliness, and loneliness is difficult to describe. Loneliness is that sense of disconnect, and I long for that love and acceptance and connection. Really, I long for relationship. That's how God designed us. But in loneliness, I feel like I don't have it, and for many, they feel like I can't really ever have it. I don't have these relationships. And maybe you learn not to trust. Maybe you were traumatized by an abusive relationship. And so you've pulled back and
Mhm.
you're not in relationship.
You were talking about the effects of social media and the fact that we can instantaneously gain a friend, but
Yes.
do they know how I handle stress? Do they know what I'm most worried about in my life? Do they even know my favorite color or my favorite food or my children's names? So those instant relationships
Right.
are not really quality relationships. And you talk in your book about the importance of quality relationships. So speak for a moment, if you will, about what makes a relationship worthwhile.
Yeah. A relationship that's worthwhile does require an investment of time,
Mm.
and it requires an investment, emotional investment. And I have to decide I'm going to trust. I have to decide I'm going to spend time with somebody. And uh, there's been such a devaluing of relationships that it's like, oh, it's not even worth the time. I don't really need anybody. And so it's a little different culture right now. But here's what we know, um, we need to come together like never before. We need each other, and we need to learn, well, do I need to join a group? Do I need to really push myself in directions I don't feel like going? We become so self-absorbed. In other words, we're just so self-absorbed with everything going on in the world, and we're doom scrolling. We're always on the negative, and we really lose touch with those around us. And boy, the difference a relationship or relationships can make. Here's my suggestion: develop 3 to 5 key close relationships. 3 to 5 and in your life, and allow the next 6 months, a year to build healthy relationships in a way that maybe you've never done before.
With the pandemic, you spoke to this before, we all of a sudden we were getting together, so to speak, via Zoom. But to me, that was so unfulfilling. I would much rather have a cup of coffee with someone within 3 feet of me where we can see eye to eye, we can see nonverbal communication cues, we can hear their heart in a way that
Mhm.
while the screen was better than nothing, I think to some degree we're losing the art of that interpersonal connection in person.
Yes. And I'm so grateful that we have the digital way
Oh,
of doing things. It's really, I mean, we're able to do this today,
yes.
and that's great. But I can't have 100% of my relationships this way. So good point.
So very true.
And there is something that happens in person. We all we need a hug.
Yeah,
There's healthy touch. But there's something that happens in person in relationships that is so important. It's hard to go for a walk together digitally.
for sure. Now, why do healthy people, and the emphasis is on healthy people, not grow in isolation?
Yeah, isolation is at first it feels safe. I can isolate, and I start to tell myself a lie that I don't really need to go out or do anything or be with anybody. At first, isolation feels, oh, I can kind of do whatever I want. The longer we spend disconnected, the longer we spend in isolation, the more we're prone to do negative self-destructive behaviors. Well, what is that? Alcohol, digital escapism behaviors, pornography, food addiction. The more we're in isolation, the more we're prone, and this is kind of how we're wired as a human being, where the more we're prone to do self-destructive things.
Yes.
We saw this during the pandemic. The work from home I mentioned really didn't work because we had so many people that were actually drinking alcohol while they were working, overeating while they were supposedly working. So we need to look and go, um, what am I doing when I isolate? Is it a healthy behavior?
I'm having a great conversation with colleague Dr. Gregory Jantz. He is the author of The Power of Connection: Maximize Your Health and Happiness with Close Relationships. So, Dr. Jantz, speak for a minute about the fact that there is a high cost to loneliness. What is that?
Yeah, there is a high cost to loneliness. I think we need to look at even what happens in our immune system, our ability for our body to stay well. A depressed immune system, if you will, is one that could be more prone to disease. So we do know that isolation and physical ailments, things even as simple as headaches, stomach aches, aches and pains, a person will score higher in some of the physical elements the longer they stay in isolation and loneliness. Isn't that interesting?
That is.
We know that immune function ultimately is affected. We know that levels of certain brain chemicals, one is called dopamine. It's a brain chemical that has to do a lot with mood, as well as one called serotonin. We know that when we're in isolation and depression, our brain chemistries tend to get off, and we tend to struggle a bit with appropriate chemical balance. So there is a direct physical effect from too much isolation or loneliness. It will make us more prone just to being sick.
Is there any connection between loneliness and a high cost with respect to our cognitive functioning or our mindset or where our thoughts go?
Yes. So mindset can be really important. The more I'm in a state of loneliness, the more that my self-esteem, how I feel about myself, diminishes. Um, I'm probably not cognitively challenged, and I'm probably leaning towards some self-depreciating thoughts about myself the more I stay in loneliness. Isolation, particularly, we know that night times can be really difficult. If you really feel this aloneness, and it can be a sense of times of just a sense of panic. And many people who struggle with loneliness really describe dark and at times just frightening nights.
That is a high cost across the spectrum, whether we're talking about our emotional well being, our emotional health, our physical health.
Yes.
And let's look at the flip side. What are the benefits to social connections? Because I would imagine we have some listeners who started off like you and I did. Pandemic hit, 2 weeks to slow the spread. We're going to stay home. We're going to isolate. But after time, some of us have resumed going out, and others are like, no, I'm good. So let's talk about what the benefits of social connections are.
One of the benefits is it challenges us to get outside of ourself. And what that looks like is when I'm in relationship, I'm more likely to do more positive things than not. I may be invited to go to a social gathering. I may be invited to go for a walk. I may be invited to go for a hike, an outing. I'm more prone to do healthy behaviors when I'm in relationship. Isn't that interesting? Um, and I'm not saying if you're alone, you don't go for a walk, but I'm saying you're more prone to do these positive behaviors. And when we engage in behaviors with others, activities, we tend to bond. It brings us together. There's an emotional bonding, and you have a positive memory. So there's the memory of, hey, we did that hike. We made it to
Yeah.
that lake. I can't believe it. And you have a positive memory that brought you together. And it will also help spur you on to do other activities that maybe you wouldn't have done before.
Well, and you're a male colleague. I'm going to look at this from the female perspective.
Sure.
When we were stuck at home, I know plenty of people who got on Zoom and they were still in their pajama pants.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That isolation, to your point, it does impact our mood. There is a greater tendency to fall down that pit of despair and depression and anxiety. But when we get outside and we actually have face to face human interaction, at least for some of us as women, we are more likely to pay more attention to our self care, to our grooming. And that also has an impact on our mood. When we're staying home in pajama pants, we
Yeah,
look at ourselves and we
yeah.
go, oh man, I'm just a slug. But when we give a little bit more attention because maybe we're going out with someone else, a little bit more attention to self care, that can actually improve our mood as well.
That's a really important point. If I'm going to be with people, I tend to practice better self-care and probably hygiene and just taking a little extra attention to care for myself. That's a really good one.
And it does impact our self-esteem. If I go
Absolutely.
too many days without social connection, I'm just not as careful to tend to
Yeah.
those things that impact my mood.
There you go.
Now, you say that the lack of strong relationships increases, listeners, I want you to hear this, increases premature death by 50%. That statistic is staggering. I want you to hear that. Lack of strong relationships increases premature death by 50%. Why is that, Dr. Jantz?
You know, it is interesting. Some of the relationship studies and some of the studies around loneliness, and there are studies you can check them out. It's fascinating that we're actually spending money on research studying loneliness. In fact, in the United Kingdom, there is amazingly, there's a person that is the prime minister of loneliness. What? You
What?
know, we actually have a government position uh, that has a title of loneliness because it's such a problem. Isn't that amazing? It's
Wow.
such a problem that the government there is looking at it and trying to promote because it's promote relationships because of the health and the longevity. So again, we know ultimately it does affect longevity, and I think it goes back to at times, and we can't always blame it on this, but the disease process. I'm more susceptible to getting sick. My immune system's not functioning at its fullest. So those are some of the things we need to look at.
Oh my goodness. But what I have noticed in my own patients, as well as just friends and family members, is that often when we need people the most, we tend to withdraw. Why is that?
I may feel ashamed. I may feel defective. I may feel unworthy. And I begin to pull back instead of pulling forward into the relationships. I may suffer from embarrassment. I shouldn't be struggling. And you start to get into this self talk. So you pull away at the very time we need to reach in to others. So it's a natural tendency. So it takes more energy for me to go, okay, I really do need to reach out and talk with that friend. I probably need to seek some counsel or some prayer. I need to stretch versus pull back.
And that can be hard. The longer that we have remained disconnected, the harder it is to kind of force ourselves to move outside of our comfort zone, if you will, to reconnect.
Absolutely.
Dr. Jantz, you talk about real connection means connecting with real people. Talk about that for a minute because we do live in a society where, as we've talked about earlier in this episode, where we're so inclined to jump on our screens and think that that's connection. But for the person who, like we mentioned right before the break, kind of got used to just interacting how you and I are across the screen today, they may be thinking, I don't even know where to begin with connecting with real people.
Yeah. And maybe I need to look at I like looking at maybe even some church groups and what are some offerings, what are some potential groups that are going on that I could I know force yourself to get
Right.
there and do, but plugging in first in a group setting. And you go, wow, I don't. A group setting can be a place then where I start to develop more individual one-on-one relationships. So it's just a place to start.
We could talk for a few minutes about what are the five keys to connection, because I think this is crucial for our listeners to hear who may be feeling lonely.
Sure. You know, there's different keys, and I've just broke down a few there. But one of the keys that we need um, really is we need to have a sense of acceptance in relationships. And what I mean by acceptance is I can be in relationship with a person, and I feel affirmed by them. I feel that I have a sense of value. I feel that they care. A key to a relationship, a healthy relationship, is empathy. I feel understood. That's an important key. If I feel constantly judged or ashamed or put down, that's not a relationship. So
Right.
when there's empathy, a sense of feeling understood, boy, three one of the critical human needs we have is a sense of feeling understood by another human being.
Yes, absolutely. So if our listeners have been listening to our conversation today and they're resonating, maybe they still feel lonely. Maybe they are part of that 61 or greater percent. What
Mhm.
hopeful perspective would you want to leave them with today?
Yes, one of the things I want you to look at is, okay, I mentioned at the very beginning, hope comes when there's a plan. Today,
Yeah.
let's just start to put together a plan. You might have noticed that this little book on connection is a little book.
Right.
Our attention spans have really dropped.
You're
So,
right.
100 pages of information and strategy, because our it's hard to have attention these days, right? Social media, everything is so our attention span has dropped. So one of the pieces of hope that is real is I really can change, but today I need to take a baby step towards doing something. Maybe it's reading the book. Maybe today you heard me say that I need to plug into some kind of a group setting. I need to get myself outside the walls of my home and start engaging. So today I can make a decision and I'll feel a sense of relief when I just start to make some decisions and make progress every day. And I can tell you, you won't have regret. You'll be glad you did, and you'll feel more and more empowered by taking those risks.
And you were saying some of the five keys to connection. But, friend, if you are not one who is struggling with loneliness, you can offer some of those keys to connection to those around you who may be experiencing loneliness.
Well,
You
that's a wonderful point. Yes.
you could be
By reaching out yourself, you may be serving others in a way you didn't realize.
and we both know from our professional experience that serving others gets us outside of ourselves. It boosts our mood. It makes us feel better about the situation. And I think it's biblical that when we reach outside of our own needs and serve others, God blesses that.
And it's worth the risk. What we want to do today, if we just stay where we are today, we might have regret.
That's
So I
right.
want to encourage you. Let's move beyond regret and let's begin to take the steps. And sometimes I need outside help. Sometimes I need the help of a counselor or some help to really keep me moving forward. But if I do that, I will not live in regret.
It's true. And even that reaching out to the help through a counselor, a minister, a therapist, that is forming another type of connection. We
There
haven't
you
talked
go.
about that, but
Absolutely.
it is connection nonetheless.
Absolutely.
Friends, I want to leave you with a verse that comes out of Ecclesiastes 4, verses 9 through 10. And it says, two are better than one because they have a good return on their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up, but pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. This just underscores what Dr. Jantz has been saying. You will not regret going outside your comfort zone, reaching out to others, and forming those connections. If
Yes.
you need to start, like he said, start in a group setting, start with a therapist. But the key is make a step today. And if you're wondering, where do I go from here? This has been a good conversation, but I'm not sure where to go. I'd say pick up a copy of this little book by Dr. Jantz. He's right. It's not small. Look, it's the size of my hand. And it's filled with lots of pictures and illustrations as well. So it's meaty, but it's easily digestible. Make that your first step. And we will put all the information about Dr. Jantz, his ministry, A Place of Hope, as well as his books and resources in the show notes at drmichelleb.com. Dr. Jantz, thank you so much for your time,
You're
for your
welcome.
wisdom.
Good to be with you today.
Friends, until we meet again, this has been your Hope Filled Perspective with Dr. Michelle Bengtson. Until next week, it's my prayer for you that you have a hope filled week.